So what are the United States and, of course, Iran and Israel up to again? They're waging a war that has lasted for more than 5 days. And today we'll take a look at how that war is going for them. And at this moment, it's important to say that the war between Iran, Israel, and the United States is very, very, very much affecting the war between Russia and Ukraine as well. Because Russia is providing Iran with satellite images and intelligence information. And of course, one could talk about the fact that theoretically, some form of supply could also take place through the Caspian Sea. Even though, of course, Russia is bogged down in Ukraine and has a lot of its resources there and so on, theoretically, it could happen in the event that the Russians saw that the Americans were pulling the weaker end or that they were having problems. Theoretically, it could happen that the Russians or the Chinese would send something to Iran in some form. And for the same reason, from the same motive, and at the same moment when we started sending things to Ukraine after Russia invaded Ukraine, because we also first needed to know what the situation would be. And only after Ukraine managed to stop that the main onslaught, the main attack, did not make it collapse and it held on, only then did we start sending help because we thought it might actually make sense. And in this respect, Iran is also a bit of a danger that if Iran holds on, as it seems to be holding on so far, if the regime does not collapse, as it unfortunately seems it will not, and if the Americans continue to struggle, as it looks like they probably will, then the chance that the Russians will get involved in other ways than just providing information increases with each passing day. And at that moment, those two conflicts could become connected in other ways, not just by Ukrainians supplying intercepted drones to America, America theoretically supplying Patriots to Ukraine, and so on. It could become even more interconnected, and at that point we have the beginnings, not to say a third world war, but the beginnings of a fairly large conflict where on one side America is fighting, let's say, Iran, which is supported by major powers, and then Russia is fighting Ukraine, which is supported by major powers, which already has the characteristics of a fairly large conflict or a large cascading effect of conflict. However, if we look at how the conflict is progressing on a practical and current level, there is still massive bombing of Tehran with civilian targets being hit. According to Iranian sources, more than 1,500 civilians have already been killed, which are unverifiable sources and unverifiable information, probably propaganda, but it can be assumed that there are certainly hundreds of civilians dead or seriously injured because the campaigns are very ruthless, the bombs are falling into the cities, and the targets are simply in areas where civilians live, so this can definitely happen. It should also be said that Iran continues to maintain its momentum in bombing Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Dubai, and these areas, threatening the Strait of Hormuz, threatening the Persian Gulf. So, of course, Iran continues to send swarms of drones. And the Americans are not in a very good situation because they don't have many cheap ways to destroy these swarms of Iranian drones. They haven't really learned their lesson in Ukraine, and at this moment, the best solution is some form of interceptor drones or something like that. And if the Americans can't implement this, the war will become even more expensive, and it's already becoming extremely costly now because, of course, they'll have to waste Patriots and, who knows, other interesting anti-aircraft missiles that are very expensive. They'll have to use aircraft takeoffs to destroy drones, which is also very expensive. So in this regard, the war is getting more expensive every day. It's really getting much more expensive, and even though, of course, the American budget for waging wars, conducting offensive operations, and for the military is enormous, producing Patriot missiles, producing anything that gives Americans the ability to properly defend themselves against drone swarms is more or less so costly, and it's not that fast either. So a situation could arise where the Americans really run out of those missiles. They could easily run out of missiles. And of course, that's another inconvenience because the Americans will have a high consumption of their air defense missiles here around Iran in order to defend themselves or to defend their allies against Iranian drones. And that means there will be a shortage of them in Ukraine, which the Russians must also be very pleased about. Besides the high oil prices, which make them very happy, there's also a shortage of air defense systems that Europe could buy from America and send to Ukraine, which probably also makes the Russians very happy. And honestly, there's very little about this Iranian conflict that the Russians really need to be extremely worried about, because the very fact that the conflict is happening, for example, makes China more dependent on Russia than if the conflict weren't happening. Overall, it almost seems like now Russia will really try to make the conflict last as long as possible, because as long as the conflict continues, Russia is comfortable. Yeah, their situation is better than it would have been without it. And probably the most interesting and the most important thing is really the price of gas, but mainly the price of oil. Oil prices are extremely high and are slowly approaching the levels they were at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Sure, it's not exactly at the very highest levels, but it's at those standard levels where it stayed for a long time and even above them before it started dropping back. Right now, the price is at $86 per barrel of oil, and that's just a disaster. That's a disaster that costs a huge amount of money, and make no mistake, it costs the United States itself a lot of money too. I've heard arguments that Americans are fine because they have Venezuela. That's complete nonsense. Venezuela is a totalitarian regime that's only just starting to negotiate with the Americans, and there's absolutely no way you can say that any kind of massive extraction that could cover the consumption of the United States is about to start there. That will take years. It will take years, if it even happens at all, before Venezuela ramps up extraction and production enough to cover the demands of the United States and to have a significant impact on oil prices. At this moment, America can't take a significant amount of oil from Venezuela. It can't. At the same time, it isn't able to process a significant amount of oil in its refineries. So even if, which they aren't, but even if they were suddenly able to just suck Venezuela dry, they wouldn't be able to make what they need from that oil, which is gasoline. So not only Europe, but America is also currently suffering from high oil prices and will therefore suffer from high energy and fuel prices, which is obviously something that hurts them and will create a lot of pressure on Donald Trump and his administration to end the war as quickly as possible. And all the Iranian regime needs to do is simply hold out. Hold out, hold out, keep it up, dig in, be patient, cause pain, cause losses, cause things to become more expensive. And America doesn't have the long-term ability to lead this type of conflict. It will be in a terrible way. It will be politically unpleasant. It will be economically problematic. It will harm both the United States and Europe, and of course the Middle East, which are important allies. And of course, it will also harm China, which to some extent you can consider a benefit. On the other hand, when you harm China, it also has a cascading effect that harms both Europe and the United States. And what will be worse for Europe than for the United States won't be energy prices, but migration problems, because from Persia, from Iran, if the war lasts there for a longer time, there will be a strong tendency for people to flee. It's a nation of 90 million. Those people won't stay there. Even if they believed in some kind of revolution or something, they won't really want to live there if the country falls apart. If the war lasts for a long time, they'll just leave, and they're already leaving now. A lot of people are already leaving now. They're heading mainly north to Azerbaijan and Turkey. Border crossings are already being closed, things like that. The pressure is starting to be felt there. The situation there just isn't developing well at all. So these are the reasons, these oil prices that are kind of setting the direction we're heading in. And that's the direction where Iran is winning. They're winning by being able to survive. Yeah, Iran is winning because oil prices are rising quickly. They're rising faster than expected. The strategy that Iran was aiming for, thank you for the donation, the strategy that Iran was aiming for is working. It's working very well and creating a lot of pressure. At the same time, the United States doesn't have the strength, the capacity, the will, or the political support to carry out a ground invasion. Boots on the ground, soldiers on the ground, that's something that's absolutely unthinkable. Moreover, what's extremely important for Iran is that the war itself is messing up NATO. Yeah, for example, Spain is outright against this war and is sabotaging the United States' efforts to fight there. But Spain is a special case because the Spanish government is against Israel, basically anti-Israel, yeah. So Spain is a special case. But across Europe, the support for this invasion is more or less lukewarm. It's being questioned a lot because there are a lot of buts. And everyone understands that Iran can't have nuclear weapons, that it's simply a dangerous theoretical threat, that Israel can't risk it. Everyone understands that, but the problem here is that it's hard to support something you weren't prepared for, something you weren't consulted about, something that was just thrown at you as a done deal. It's hard to support something that significantly strengthens your archenemy, which is Russia. It's hard to support something that damages you so brutally in terms of energy prices and economic impact. It's hard to support something that causes migration pressure on your region. It's just hard to support all of this at the cost of eliminating the theoretical threat that the regime in Iran might acquire nuclear weapons. Especially when, in exchange for the theoretical possibility that the Iranian regime might acquire nuclear weapons, we are heading towards what you are actually governing right now. We are heading towards a devastated country, towards a fanatical, completely frenzied Iranian regime led by a military government, which is all that will remain if that regime survives. We are heading towards terrorist militias and all of this. So we've gotten rid of the theoretical nuclear threat, but at the cost of creating an absolutely non-theoretical, absolutely real and practical threat of a completely conventional nature, which will take the form of terrorists, really angry Iranians, a totalitarian government that will remain there, and a devastated region. That's not a very good deal, and it's really hard to support. And because of this, NATO is in disarray. There is no consensus there. The Allies are no longer sticking together as much. So in this regard, it's a win for the Iranians. It's beneficial for them. From the perspective of the United States, it's a problem. At the same time, Iran was prepared for this war and is very determined to fight. The people in leadership in those Revolutionary Guards who are committed to making the regime work and keeping it going are determined to fight to the very end because it's about their survival. They are closely tied to the regime. If the regime doesn't exist, neither will those people, nor the Revolutionary Guards, nor the families of the Revolutionary Guards. They are completely tied to the regime and they will really fight because everything is at stake for them. In this respect, of course, the United States can continue to bomb Iran. The best thing would probably be if they carried out a ground invasion. That would be the surest way to overthrow the regime, but they won't do that. So their other options are to continue bombing Iran, to support the Kurds with weapons, which they are already doing at this point. And the Kurds are preparing to fight. So they will support the Kurds with weapons, who will then fight against the Iranian government and then somehow involve Pakistan in the war, which will want to take over these southern regions because these southern regions are important for Pakistan due to water resources and because Iran has dams there and those dams can steal or regulate water resources for Pakistan, and Pakistan might want to seize them or at least destroy them. So this is what America can do. Try to draw Pakistan into the war. Try to draw the Kurds into the war or incite the Kurds to revolt. Maybe even try to draw Iraq into the war and somehow try to weaken Iran, deprive it of territory, deprive it of stability, and force the Kurds to fight. In addition to, let's say, damaging its territorial integrity like this, and through that, or besides Pakistan taking a piece of Iran, they can also, of course, destroy the Iranian Navy. The United States can destroy the Iranian Air Force, and they can eliminate the nuclear program. All of this, of course, they can do and are already doing, but the result of all these efforts will not be a victory for the United States. The result of all these efforts will be a victory for Iran, and that victory will take the form of survival. It will be a similar kind of victory that Ukraine is heading towards, which has been defending itself against Russia for 4 years. And even though it will lose some territory, even though it has lost a lot of people, even though it will lose Crimea and these things, the very survival of the state itself compared to the great power that got stuck there and lost a lot of money is basically a victory. Just like when the Soviet Union attacked Finland, Finland also kind of lost. It had to submit to a certain extent. It had to declare neutrality. It lost some territory, but from today's perspective, it's considered that it actually won. In a similar scenario, much money was spent, many things were lost, and the United States also became lost there. The United States, which will cut off some territory from this country that's 3 times bigger than Ukraine, will take away its territory, strip it of its nuclear program, strip it of its navy, strip it of its air force. They will strip it of its navy, strip it, of course, but in the end, it will simply be the Revolutionary Guards who remain there, who can hold on, who can defend themselves, who can really get a grip on the country, and they will have the legitimacy of having defended Iran, at least in some form, against the attack of the United States. It will be a legitimate military country, which was fine, just full of SS men simply. If we compare Iran, for example, to Nazi Germany, then the Revolutionary Guards are simply the SS. That's a similar parallel. So the absolute SS men will be in power. They'll hold the state. They'll have under them people who were bombed and betrayed by the United States and so on. And they'll have the legitimacy of at least having kept it together somehow. At that moment, of course, the problem for the regime will be that here in the north, maybe the Kurds will be able to fight for their own state or something like that. Theoretically, that state could serve as a place where the United States would have a base from which NATO could then attack Iran if Iran did something stupid in the future. But at the same time, that state, some kind of Kurdistan or something like that, would of course seriously annoy Turkey. So this victory, the creation of Kurdistan, from which it would then be possible to potentially attack the remains of Iran, would come at the cost of Turkey being absolutely furious and complete instability within NATO due to Turkey's presence in NATO. So that would also be more of a Pyrrhic victory if they managed to take the northern part from Iran, give it to the Kurds, and somehow operate from there to project American and Western influence. And of course, if what we said comes true and Pakistan manages to take the southern part, then not only will the Turks be pissed off at the Americans because of Kurdistan, but at the same time, Pakistan will be successful, which will piss off the Indians, right? So, in this regard, it seems to me that we're more or less heading towards some form of geopolitical stalemate. And from America's perspective, we're almost heading towards a loss, or rather, not a win. It will be hard to call it a defeat when we see a diminished Iran, an Iran without nuclear weapons, an Iran without a navy, a halved Iran, and so on and so forth. But it will also be hard to call it a victory if the Americans remove the Islamist regime. Like if they remove a leadership similar to Adolf Hitler, if we get the parallel, but leave behind some kind of torso that's led by the Revolutionary Guards, aka the SS, right? Yeah, it will be hard to call it a victory, and it almost seems to me that it could be called a certain geopolitical defeat for the United States and the West as a whole. This operation seems less and less beneficial to me with each passing day, so it's becoming more and more overpriced and more heading toward a very unsatisfactory outcome. I'm extremely skeptical, and please let me know how you see this, because I can't imagine that the Americans could destroy a regime to which millions of people are tied just by simple bombing, spreading through the Kurds and so on. This regime still holds a lot of weapons, keeps dissidents imprisoned, and everyone who protested is either dead or has family in prison, with the threat that their relatives will be executed if they protest again or get involved in anything. The people who are or were willing to stand up to that regime are either dead at this point or scared to death. And of course, the Americans are also dropping bombs on them because they also live in Tehran. It's really a very unpleasant situation. This whole thing is a highly toxic situation that is not heading for a good ending by any means. So that's how it is. Support the creators, share your thoughts, and see you next time. Join the streams, come and discuss. On my stream, you have a voice, right? That's how it is.